So for me, the first big mistake that I made, like this was very early on in my career, is I started doing a bunch of research. Obviously, you start to think you're an expert after doing, a few months of research, so you think you know everything. And so I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to throw harder. I'm throwing 73 at the time. I know hip shoulder separation is supposed to be important. I think that hip rotation is important. And so I kind of think I know what I'm doing, but I really have no idea what I was doing. And so I think this is a common trap that a lot of even our athletes can fall into at times, which is like paralysis by analysis, overusing video. And so for me, like I would go in my backyard, I'd have this crappy mound that I tried to manicure myself. I would just be training by myself. I'd set up a video camera. I would throw 2 or 3 throws. I would go and watch the video. Again, no idea what I was really trying to feel or do. No, not really a clue what I was trying to see on the video either. Go back, make 2 or 3 more throws into a net, go watch the video, back and forth, back and forth. And I'd end these, hour-long throwing sessions way more domed up than when I started. And at the time I didn't realize it. I thought, well, I need immediate feedback. And so I got to throw one, no idea what I'm trying to feel, go watch the video, and that's my immediate feedback because that's what so-and-so article said, you need immediate feedback. And I didn't realize until years later, I get to college, you can't bring a video camera, you can't bring a video camera to the field. You're not radar gunning yourself every throw. Like you just have to go out, play catch every day, like get your long toss in, get your catch play in, get your bullpens in, inner squads. And it forces you to get out of this like very internal mindset to more of an external mindset. We talked about like you can either be thinking over the rubber, over the plate. So internal, external focus. For me, video got me in such an internally focused mindset that I was just completely domed up for most of high school. Whereas just getting away from that, getting away from video and actually throwing baseballs to humans, that's the skill of our sport. And so for me, I get to college and suddenly I'm forced to do that. And I go from 85 to 95 over those 4 years. Again, could have done a lot of things better, a lot of things differently. But one of the key things is I wasn't obsessing over my video constantly. I wasn't even watching video for months at a time at certain points. So it's not to say the video can't be helpful, but I think specifically for guys like me who are very analytical, it can be a huge issue. There's certain guys that have no problem flipping the switch in game, going out and competing. I can think of a number of big league guys that I work with right now who, again, you could even try to yip them up with video, and no matter what you do, they're still going to go out and compete and not walk batters. But we also see this on the flip side. There's a lot of guys that fall into that category, especially that come and reach out to us, where they fall into that analytical mindset. And so you get them thinking about exact positions in their delivery. You get them over analyzing what they're trying to do. And I think for me, it's like the death loop. If they start filming themselves, checking video, throwing, like it's just a death loop and they're not going to get out of that. So what are you guys' experiences on that? For me, that was a huge issue that I didn't realize. It took me 4 years to figure out that was a problem. Have you guys dealt with that? And then have you seen that in your athletes as well?
Yeah, for me, I didn't get super analytical when I was younger, so those weren't some of the mistakes that I made. But as I got older and started to learn more, especially in the early parts of it, like kind of you mentioned in the very beginning, you learn something and you're like, I never considered that before. So now I obsess over that. Like whether it's watching video, doing like trying to find certain positions, and like your goal changes. Whereas the goal before was, throw as hard as possible, in general, just be a better pitcher or something. And then when you're watching video, I'm sure you see something, in your lower half, and you're like, now the goal is literally just make my body do that exact thing.
You start chasing different things. Like the first 10 throws of the session, you're chasing this, and then you see something, and now you're chasing this. And you're just ping-ponging all over the place,
right?
Trying to hit positions.
And you very likely have not done the homework to figure out, what does the body need to do earlier in the delivery, perhaps to get you to those positions that you're chasing. So you end up, you even said like you dome yourself up the entire session. At the beginning of the session, you probably had a goal, like what do I want to get out of this? If you go back at the end of the session and think about like what did I truly get out of that, it becomes pretty clear that like you were going down the wrong rabbit holes there. And like I said, as a young pitcher, I didn't do that. But as I got older, started to learn more, that really became a challenge for me because it cost me a lot of training days.
Also too, like we forget that like our body can only move a certain way. Mm-hmm. So trying to like emulate like specific moves or patterns or positions, like for me, like I always try to keep my front leg closed. I never could. It drove me nuts. And then I realized, I actually don't have to. Like it's actually like that's how my body wants to throw. Mm-hmm. And it's like once you figure out like your body moves a certain way and like no one else moves like you, then you stop chasing positions as well too, and it kind of like freed me up big time, knowing that like I'm going to throw how my body needs me to throw, and then whatever it does, it kind of does.
I think it comes back to having a very clear purpose and understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. And at 15, 16, 17 years old, like, again, no matter how much reading you think you've done, like it's unlikely you've been exposed to the amount of information or the concepts that are exactly where they need to be. Again, speaking from personal experience, like I really didn't start to understand how the delivery was supposed to function at that point. And so I could think I was like seeing what I thought I was trying to accomplish, like, but I really didn't have a purpose. I really didn't understand how the throw worked. I didn't understand what I should be trying to feel with my lower half, what I should be feeling with my upper half, like why I was flying open so bad. I didn't understand that was coming from my pelvis opening early, and if I could just keep that closed, hold tension. Like I didn't understand how the throw was supposed to work. So me trying to do it all on my own, like, was kind of a failed proposition from the very start. But I kind of think of it of like, in a perfect world, it's not like you want video to just not exist. You probably want somebody monitoring your video and then filtering out, all those filtering out everything and then just distilling it to like the one or two things. So, since that point, like since high school, I kind of realized like video was dangerous for certain athletes. I really hate watching video of myself. And so I will absolutely have to. I'll watch a video, try to figure out one little thing here or there. But I would have somebody else that I trusted watch the video. Hey, what do you see? What do you see? And then they would translate it to me verbally, and then I could translate that into whatever I needed to work on. But when I start watching my own video, it just starts to get into this over-analytical mindset. The way that I've tried to explain it before, but it almost feels like, so when you're throwing yourself, you're in like first-person mode. Like you play video games like first-person shooter. Okay, you're intimately connected to your body. Like you're having a first-person experience of what's happening in your body through your own eyes. You watch a video, now it's like a third-person shooter. You're like outside your body, looking in third person. And so even if you are able to identify a change on that video, now you have to then translate that back from third person to first person and into a feel, or actually making that change in your own delivery. So there's a disconnect that can happen going from first person to third person and trying to translate that back to first person. Where if you can just like take an athlete, don't even watch, like they don't even have to see their video. They're opening early with their pelvis. You don't need to necessarily show them on video, but you get them to feel that in first person, feel that with whatever, drill, cue, velo belt, doesn't matter. And now they immediately feel it. There's no disconnect. They felt it in first person. They felt it in their own body, and they can go make that change immediately versus seeing it, now having to get the feel, and then actually do it in their delivery. So I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but I've always grappled with that like first person versus third person thing, and coming outside of my body can be difficult to then make the change.
Well, I think you also have like different types of learners too. People, who are auditory, visual, and kinesthetic, who knowing your athlete and knowing which one they prefer also helps out. Whereas like you may not have wanted to see it, but you want to feel it. So like someone who was coaching you like would be better off knowing that. You could be a visual learner where like the video actually helps you, or someone who's super athletic, you just tell them to do it and they can do it. So it's like, I think understanding that part also too, like if you're not taught in the way that you prefer, you can just crash and just beat heads like the entire time and you're not getting anything accomplished.
Right. Yeah. Speaking on the third person, the first person thing, one thing that as a taller dude, when I hate watching video of myself as well. I always make sure I have video of my best throws. If I'm throwing especially hard that day, I get video of it. I don't immediately take it and go look at it, but I have it. And that way, if I'm ever down for whatever reason, if everything feels fine and my velo's down or something, I know that something mechanical was likely off. At least I have that video to go back to.
Super, super important.
Yes.
That distinction between having the video, maybe not every single day, every single throw, but like having some indication that you can go back to, because things do go wrong. Your mechanics are always in flux in some capacity. Like your release point, your stride direction, like it's never going to be, and not to mention if you happen to get injured, things will change. So that's a super important point. Like that's why we have the mocap, like be able to bring guys in here, even when things are going great, and get a baseline of exactly where you're at. So then when inevitably things are not going to be going great forever, we can have that comparison.
You have that to refer back to, for sure. I think like when I watch my own video as a taller dude, I feel like I look really slow. And I remember going down this rabbit hole probably 5 or 6 years ago. Pretty much any pitcher I watch, any facility I train at, most of the guys that are throwing are going to be shorter than me, right, and smaller than me. And they're going to move a little bit differently than me. So I'd watch all these other dudes throw 95 that are smaller than me, and of course they look faster. They are, rotating a bit quicker, and like their levers are shorter, and they're able to move through things a little bit quicker. So when I throw, I feel like I'm moving very fast. This goes back to like that, third person, first person thing. I feel fast, but when I look at the video, I can tell that like it looks slower than these other guys. So in my mind, I go to, well, I just need to like move faster, rotate faster. And then I would just spend, months, pull downs, turn and burns, whatever I felt like doing that week to like try to just move or rotate faster to make my video look like other people's video. And I already felt like I was moving as fast as I could. And no amount of training that I was going to do was going to make me look as fast as those other guys.
Right.
So
it comes back to like picking a good comp. Like if you're gonna set your goal of like this is my North Star of what I'm trying to accomplish, like you better be damn sure like that's an appropriate North Star to pick.
Right.
Like you shouldn't be imitating Marcus Stroman's timing, tempo, positions, rhythm, because you're completely different body type. Like, maybe Tyler Glasnow's a better comp for your body type, but at the same time, like you don't necessarily know his hip anatomy, you don't know his thoracic mobility. Like maybe it's great, but like you also seem to, throw well with some coil and some counter rotation, and so maybe it's not. So it comes back to like knowing if you're gonna, not that everybody should be picking a comp and trying to imitate another high level pitcher, but if you are, you want to be very careful about be intentional and have a reason why you're doing that. For me, the best comps are somebody with very similar body frame. We know something about their mobility, and we know that matches up with this athlete's mobility screen. So very similar body type, levers, mobility, and then stylistically some similarities that already exist. Leg lift, posture, glove arm, length of arm action. But then there's like one or two things that they're just doing better. And then you can highlight that to that specific athlete. It's like, okay, you throw exactly like Tyler Glasnow, except he keeps his hips closed 2 frames longer. And so that becomes the main thing that they do differently, and now it becomes super clear, okay, that's exactly how I will be moving when I figure out my main limiting factor. I think that's where comps become really beneficial. But when there's so many different things from this comp from you, it just becomes, I think it's just overwhelming and overkill and not particularly useful. I mean, when I would go down all these rabbit holes myself in college. I'd get in some rut like freshman, sophomore year, whatever. And then I'm out there the next day trying to throw like Roger Clemens, and then the next day I'm trying to throw like Aroldis Chapman. Like you get into that state where you're just like blindly trying stuff or trying to imitate different pitchers. I think that's a sign you're very much in your own head. Like that's typically a bad sign. You don't want to see that. Doesn't mean you don't take bits and pieces and try to learn from bits and pieces and maybe tinker here and there at certain points in the year. But that's a telltale sign that somebody is in Dome City.
Yeah.
Great. Definitely.
Marsili, do you have like a major velocity flaw or velocity mistake that you made at any point?
Yeah, I mean, my big one was uphill, like trying to get uphill or downhill. Like that was what I was taught when I was growing up was, we're going to long toss, we're going to pull down, and then your long toss mechanics should be like basically what you do on the mound. So like you're trying to get like super uphill, arm really late, and then really work downhill. And in reality, when I was younger, like didn't really understand that, you don't actually throw the ball like this, or else probably why I missed high a whole lot. But it's just understanding the like flat ground mechanics. Like you can do shuffles, you can do long toss, whatever example you want to use. Like it's not how the mound and the game is actually played. So those mechanics are completely different. So I think probably until like my senior year of college, it was just like, oh, I need to do more reps off the mound. I need to do, plows off the mound. I need to do like actually get more reps off the mound to actually get used to throwing on the slope, because when you just throw 95% of your reps on the flat, like those mechanics aren't it. And I always felt good on the flat, and then came to game and like something feels off. Why does it not feel the same? It's just like I haven't got hardly enough reps up here. It's like, why am I trying to do so many reps on the flat versus actually where the game is played? So that was a huge one for me. It was just flat ground mechanics, uphill, downhill versus how do you actually throw and get downhill on the mound.
So the flat ground was making you end up a little bit uphill, and then when you got on the mound, you were still uphill because
Yeah.
of grooving that pattern.
Yeah, for me, it was like I was trying to land like this on the mound, like the way I long toss, so I could like really get on top of the ball and basically try and pull it down like you do for long toss and pull downs, and just realizing that's kind of not how the throw works on the mound was like a big light bulb moment for me, because I try to do that forever, where it's high glove side, replace it with a high hand, like, and it's just like there's so many flaws that kind of
So
go into that.
did you do pull downs first of all? Did you do more max distance long toss? And when you did pull downs, did you still try to create that angle, or did you bring the shoulder angle back downhill when you worked in on pull downs? Because that's a common thing too.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely like was always a huge long toss guy. That's kind of like I was always told, like, if you want to throw 90 miles an hour, you need to throw the ball 300 feet. So it's just kind of like, all right, like that's the only way I can do it. Like I'm going to try and long toss as much as possible. And then yeah, I mean, definitely on the way back in, like I was always a guy where if there were people behind my catch play partner, like they were in danger because the balls were just going that way. I could never really understand, what it was. I thought it was just like added momentum, whereas like no, I was actually throwing.
You were still
like
pulling down in this angle. So
pulling down like this and throwing the ball to the moon. It was just like never really understood that until I actually started doing them into a net, and I kind of realized like, all right, like I can actually just focus on rotating and actually getting downhill. And it was like kind of took away like the catch play partner aspect of it and just focused on like a target 3 feet in front of me and like drilling it through there. And that kind of helped me emulate getting downhill, and then helped me transfer it to the mound as well too.
I think a big reason for why that it can be an issue. It doesn't mean that like any amount of tilt is a problem, because again, there's plenty of pitchers that create some tilt, but then they're able to get back to a stacked position at landing.
Yeah.
The problem is when you create tilt and then you end up still in tilt at landing.
Yep.
Now your spine's not in this stacked posture to optimally transfer energy. It's like you're trying to throw a punch at somebody, and you throw a punch and you land here.
Yep.
I mean, we all intuitively know that when you're in that athletic stacked position, like that's where you can throw a punch with the most power, but it's simply a matter of how our spine mechanics and being able to keep our spine in this like stacked.
Well, we talk about like
position.
trying to match planes of rotation too. Like you have this trying to rotate downhill, then this is uphill, then the arm has to climb up to throw the ball down. It's just like nothing is insane.
But like to that point, like if the goal is to throw a ball 400 feet on this angle, that's roughly the angle you want to be.
Yeah.
Like those guys typically long toss the crap out of the ball. And it doesn't mean that you can't, but ideally what you want is you can be dynamic about it. Like when you're throwing on an arc, you have a higher degree of tilt, and then as you come in, your body can self-regulate the tilt, and now when you get on the mound, you can get to the proper degree of trunk tilt. And so there's like that dynamic variability aspect to it that ideally long toss is actually working on the variability, working on that ability to regulate. Yes, like Alan Jaeger says all the time, you want to come out of your mechanics in long toss. That's the whole point. It's not to just, sure, the mechanics are different on a 400-foot throw or 300-foot throw, but that's the point. The point is that you can, just like an infielder can make throws from all different arm slots, different back foot, front foot.
Yep.
Like you're building that athleticism, you're building that variability, but you need the ability to come back down on a line.
Which I think people kind of lose the athletic part of it as well too, and like gets them even more domed up is like they think it's just throw it really high and pull it down from really high. It's like no, like you can throw from so many different slots to get that proper perception of how to be athletic, and kind of figure it out that way compared to like the pitching way.
Yeah, which I think guys need to just be careful about. Don't long toss. Long toss is amazing, but like if you're gonna long toss, at the very least do pull down. Like you were doing pull downs, but even with pull downs, you had a misconception about what you're trying to do with your front side. But some guys will like long toss out, and if they don't want to throw a ton for the day, they just like stop the session, or they like just, all right, I'm done, come in. Well, all you did was just train like the uphill portion. You didn't train the downhill portion. So even if the pull downs on the way in are 60% effort, 50% effort, and you do 10 of them, like I think it's important to not take 90% of your throws up here and then none back downhill.
Yeah,
100%.
Were you a big long toss guy early in your career?
I was never great at long toss because I'm such a supinator. I can't,
Everything will cut on you?
Yeah, or run or something. It's definitely like not backspun. So I did it a lot when I was younger, but as I got older, I kind of transitioned. I kind of when I was younger, I looked at long toss as like velo training, but the feedback is the distance. And then once I started training in facilities and saw that I can get the same feedback with radar, I pretty much started doing everything into a net as far as, catch play. That way I didn't have to go find a partner, and I would just rip into a net, and then did a lot more pitching. So especially later in my career, not a huge long toss guy.
To your initial point about the flat ground, again, not just long toss, but flat ground throwing in general, and then the slope having that gap, and you always like I mean, this is almost everybody. They're like, oh, the first time I got on the mound, something feels off. Something feels off. Well, it's because you've been throwing on flat ground for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, and now you get on the slope, and so your body is adjusted to that timing. But specifically, what you most of the time you'll see one of two things, and I started to put the pieces together a little bit later once I started coaching more pro guys and seeing like, oh, their flat grounds actually look pretty garbage in a lot of cases. Like their mechanics just look terrible, but they look amazing off the mound. And those end up being the guys that are just, their bodies are now very accustomed to the slope, that it's now unaccustomed to flat ground. You definitely don't want the opposite, which is most guys, which is their body gets accustomed to flat ground, and then the mound feels foreign. The mound feels like it's this thing where the timing's off. So that brings me back to this idea of like, the mound is your office. Like you need to spend time in your office every day. But the way that I think about it is, what most guys will do and what you did is on flat ground, this part of the mound is flat, but on flat ground, they typically will create a little bit of tilt to try to feel a better block on that front side. So what you want to do ideally to throw a great flat ground throw, if you have your block, at that point your shoulders are closed, your arms up, and this is your timing. Now you get on the mound, you have this extra room where your timing was at this point, your foot was down, your arm was up, your shoulders were closed. But now there's all this extra time to land. And so by that point, where are you? Your shoulders are now open 2 frames. Your hips are more open. Like everything just gets off time because you were timed up for this timing.
Yep.
And now you're open. And it's like that little, that extra 4 inches is enough to just open everything up because you were ready for that timing. So that's one way. The other way, which is the guys who just always throw really well on the mound but have crappy flat grounds, McCullers is this way, is they actually maintain their posture. And so on the mound, if they maintain their posture, they're perfectly timed up. On flat ground, if they do that and they don't tip uphill, then they end up landing like too early relatively, and so their flat grounds look really crappy. And they end up having a soft front leg. So by not leaning back this way, by actually maintaining their posture, they end up landing too early on the mound. It ends up timing up perfectly instead of landing here. And so their flat grounds look terrible, their mounds look great. Whereas most people, their flat grounds look better, their mounds look, is off initially during spring training or during that first 4-week phase when you get off the slope. So it's like, which are we trying to optimize for, spend time in the office every day?
So for some guys, if you are getting better at your flat ground timing, could you say that they're getting worse at their timing on the mound?
Well, for me, I used to think that flat ground served a very extensive purpose in an on-ramp. Like we should spend 4+ weeks. If we want to throw 95 on the mound, make sure we get our flat grounds up to 93 before we touch the slope. And if we're only at 91, we're going to stay on flat grounds for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks until we get to 93. So now when we get on the mound, we can make sure we're going to be 3 to 5. Yeah. And so I thought that we needed to really just check that box. Flat grounds were this mandatory checkpoint along the way. Research starts coming out, okay, the stresses actually aren't substantially higher on the slope. Some are actually saying it's lower on the slope relative to the flat ground, but regardless, it's comparable. So there's not really that argument anymore for avoiding the mound earlier. If you're going to throw a 75% flat ground, why not throw a 75% short box or bullpen? That would be my argument. But realizing that, for me personally, I would spend all this time trying to get to my top flat ground numbers, check that box before I got on the mound, but then get on the mound and I was just out of sync.
Yeah.
So I'd rather use flat grounds as maybe it's that, a couple weeks, checkpoint before you get on the slope, but you're not putting a whole ton of stock into any sort of velocity numbers there. Into maybe command or pitch shapes are going to be a little bit off, but we're not putting a ton of stock into that. What we care about is the mound. And so if you have 8 weeks to get ready for the season, instead of 4 weeks on flat ground, 4 weeks on the mound or whatever, maybe it's a week or 2, a week and a half of doing some flat ground stuff, majority of that time getting on the slope and just getting accustomed to that different timing.
Even just checking in on the slope every now and then to see where your timing's at.
Yeah.
Through the process.
When I say like spend time in the office every day, it's like, I think I got that from Smoltz. I think maybe he was the one I heard that from initially, but it doesn't mean throw bullpens every day.
Right.
Think of how much you can do work off the mound. You can do plyos, water bags, fields, like
med balls,
dry work, even like
there's
visualizations.
So
yeah, exactly. Like you mentioned water bags. If you're going to throw a flat ground, like maybe you only throw 2 bullpens a week, or one outing a week and 1 bullpen a week. Okay, those are your like higher intensity days, but you probably were going to throw like a 10-pitch flat ground somewhere in there anyway. Throw a 10-pitch short box, 50 feet, 55 feet. Like you're probably going to dick around in BP anyway. Get off the slope 5 minutes a day and do dry work. Again, 90% of that is visualization, working on your routine. 10% of that is still feeling the slope, feeling the timing. You can feel some lower half positions. Water bag stuff, you can actually work on getting in and out of positions.
Yep.
Like med ball stuff, I mean, you need to be careful with some of those pseudo throwing things and make sure like the timing and everything is proper. You're not just creating bad habits, but just getting comfortable with the timing of like riding the slope, loading your backside, and then when that front foot is down, the upper half is still closed. Okay, for me, the next one I want to mention was staying sideways. Like this was a big issue for me, that if someone had just explained to me this idea of backside tension and how the lower half was actually supposed to create rotation and get that energy up the chain, like if I had just understood fundamentally how the lower half was supposed to work, I mean, instead of throwing 85 in high school, I would have thrown like 94. It would have completely changed the trajectory of my career. I would have actually had a scholarship somewhere instead of having to walk on and be the worst player on the team. And, you know, like it would have changed the whole trajectory of my career if I had understood much earlier on just like how the lower half was supposed to work. And so the cue for me of like, if someone had just come back, I say this all the time, come back to me when I'm 15 and told me to stay sideways with my pelvis, that would have been worth like everything to me. Because for me, my mechanics were, I was throwing 73 and I was just like lift here, like no power, no stability, just like no tension anywhere, just lift and go. Like I had nothing. But the stay sideways cue fundamentally gets at how we're able to wind tension into that back hip, wind tension into the ground, create ground stability, and now you actually have something to rotate. So we look at the lower half. I mean, fundamentally, there's 4 phases to the lower half. There's the drift, initial weight shift phase, which gets everything going forward. There's the hinge phase, which is where we're actually capturing a linear move and building linear momentum while loading actual tension stability into the backside. There's the unload or rotation phase, where we're releasing that tension and converting that linear momentum into rotational momentum. And then there's the block. Again, the block is important to be able to actually send that hip rotation up the chain, and now you have ground stability on the front side, and you can actually send the energy up the chain into the torso, out and around into the arm. So there's a linear momentum piece, you're converting that into rotational momentum, and then you're trying to create that tornado of energy out and around into the arm. For me, I didn't understand the back hip tension piece, and I have a ton of IR. Like I mean, my hip IR is, I just have a lot of it. I have no ER, whatever. But I like respond really well to coil. So I have no tension like here. Like there's nothing in my back hip. I'm the guy who like needs to find like these positions, like the Josh Hader coil, like a ton of T-spine rotation too. So if someone had just said, hey, stay sideways, keep your pelvis sideways, the cue I'll also use with certain guys is like, you have a laser pointer on your front hip going through the target. Like keep that laser pointer on the target as long as you can. Some guys that have a concern about with these cues of like landing too close and not getting the hips open, I don't see that too often. And maybe you guys have examples of that, but most of the time that it's guys opening too early. It's not guys like staying close too late and just landing close.
Yeah, I agree.
Like most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they're opening early, and so you want a more cue staying closed. If someone had just told me stay sideways, help me, okay, start here, reach across your body, feel that tension in your glute. Yes, feel that tension. Okay, cool. Now when you come set, find the tension, walk your way out. Walk your way out, hold the tension. Okay, that's what I'm trying to feel. Okay, so I want to lift, find the tension, and ride it. Someone had just explained to me like what you're trying to feel with tension, the conceptual understanding of how the lower half works, which I just explained, and then giving me the stay sideways or the laser pointer cue. Now when I go into my long toss, my catch play, I actually would have a purpose behind what I'm trying to do. Oh, I'm trying to keep this closed and unwind everything from there. Oh, okay. I'm not supposed to just like jump off the backside as hard as I can. That 5 minutes would have just like changed everything, because now there's a purpose and an understanding of the physics of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of our first conversation about how you used to, overanalyze video, throw two balls, go watch the video. If you had in your head just that cue, stay sideways, and then you're going to watch video, and you can simply ask yourself, you don't even have to get as deep as to like, do I have tension in my back leg? Am I blocking? Am I doing all this? Just look and say, am I staying sideways for as long as possible? And you would be able to say no.
The best cues are like super simple.
Yes.
So simple.
It takes like the 30 things that are breaking down the delivery, the front knees bowing out and the foot's turning over and the lead leg's not blocking and the glove side, like it takes all these things. If you were able to understand like where that's stemming from, okay, it's stemming from your first move is going here, or it's stemming from like early extension or leaning backwards or getting into the quad, then you can just give a cue or a drill or like a progression based on that like initial underlying cause, and then everything else, or most of those things that are related to that, will clean up. Maybe not everything else. But that's the simplest way. You don't want to just start chasing individual pieces. Like I'm going to work on the glove arm for 5 throws, then I'm going to work on thinking about my lead leg for 5 throws and thinking about my lead foot for 5 throws. You're just kind of like throwing crap at the wall and like hoping something sticks. Mm-hmm. But if you actually have like a precise understanding of where it's coming from, you can give an athlete like, stay sideways, 2 words, and it changes the whole trajectory of their career. Like that's what you're after as a coach.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, what do you got, Craig?
Some mistakes that I've made. I think in pitching development as a whole, with social media today and everything, there's always a lot of, there's a big fad somewhere out there, whether it's, probably 10 years ago or 15 years ago now, probably it was like spin rate, right? Get as much spin rate as possible. Then it was, ride 4 seams that came into that. Now sweepers, mechanically, we had short arm action kind of fad that everybody was trying to do. And one that I fell into was DeGrom when I had a video of him next to like a 90-mile-an-hour thrower, and it showed that he got to, from first move to foot strike, he got there like twice as fast. And it was like, okay, here's a dude who's skinny like me, and he's throwing 100 miles an hour. He's just getting down the mound extremely fast.
Right.
Not considering, maybe he's a better athlete than me or something like that. And so I said, I'm just going to do that. And even when I first started here at Tread, like I was a big, like just lift and go, big drifts, not creating any tension on the backside, nothing like that. And my only thought process through that whole portion of my career, honestly, was just like go as fast as possible. And I even did the short arm action one that everybody was doing a few years back. I think Robbie Ray did it and then won the Cy Young, and everybody was like, I'm going to do that.
Giolito did it.
Giolito, yeah. So you see a couple guys do it and have success, and you're like, maybe that is right for me. Not even considering if it is, just kind of like, right. He did it. What I'm doing is not good enough, so let's try something. And, looking back on it now, it's like you could probably add up 3 or 4 years of just like wasted stuff that I didn't apply permanently. I learned some things through those experiences, but as a whole, development as a pitcher, they didn't really get me a whole lot better because they weren't for me. I didn't have a good reason behind it other than why not?
Other than it worked for this guy who happens to be one of the better pitchers in the world right now.
Right.
So I'm going to just imitate that. I mean, you see that in a lot of pro organizations, like whoever their like Cy Young or All-Star is, or like the guy who's been in that organization for 10 years, like whoever that dude is, not in every case, but like a lot of cases, like the pitching coordinators, the pitching coaches, like from the top down, like through the entire system, they're teaching, okay, like our top guy, whoever it is, I'm not going to say any specific names, but like our top guy throws like, he's tall back and closed, or, he throws this type of breaking ball. So we're all going to have to now throw this. We're all going to have to throw sweepers because like our top guy in this organization who's making $100 million, now everybody has to throw this exact breaking ball. And so you even see that, I don't know if it has something to do with like just our cognitive biases as humans. We see some example of success that we're very close to, and now we just, we want to extrapolate that to everything. But I think just being around the game now for a lot of time and seeing these fads come and go, you start to realize, okay, there is value to that for certain guys. Like there's not like short arm actions can't work. We see proof that it can work for certain guys, but then we also see proof that it can hurt certain guys and that longer arm actions are better for certain guys. You see proof that higher slots, lower slots, postures, like fast tempo, slow tempo, you start to see like, it's kind of just like survivorship bias. You see the guys that it works for. You don't see the 10 that some coach like forced that change on, forced that fad on, and it ruined them. But we see that behind the scenes because we're working with those athletes too, and we're frustrated because like some coach forced him to do like forced this carry four seam gyro slider guy to now throw a sweeper, and it screwed up his entire arsenal, and now he's out of baseball. Like we see those stories too.
I think it's just a cop out for not understanding that there's multiple ways that the throw can work. And if you coach one guy and it worked for one guy, then everyone has to do it. It's like not understanding like you can be, a four seam slider, curveball guy, or like sinker. Like there's so many different ways that you can go to have someone be successful, but trying to mold someone to do something that they aren't, very good at, and then, evaluating them off of that doesn't make a whole lot of sense other than actually understanding how to get the most out of that person. Just say, hey, go be Craig Stem. Go throw like Craig this year.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's worth, like when a fad comes along, my initial reaction now is not to blindly just jump in and like get on the bandwagon. It's taking a step back and like, okay, there probably is something here. Like if sometimes there's not, sometimes the fads are just like complete eyewash, but most of the time there's something there. And so it's not like just discard it or jump headfirst into it. It's okay, for who and in what context is this beneficial? Okay, so for a shorter pitcher, faster tempo guy with a lot of IR and this type of arsenal, oh, this is a really good idea. I have two guys that I coach that fit this description. I'm going to try it with those two guys. I think that's the right orientation to look at the fads. They kind of dip your toe in. Who would this apply to? If you get amazing results, you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. Maybe you start working with a couple. Okay, now we'll try it with a couple of these guys, and maybe you find that some of these things are more generalizable and just like work for everybody, but they probably don't. And so you want to be a little bit more intentional about not just jumping on the latest fad bandwagon, or more generally, like our athletes are on Instagram all the time, right? Every day there's some new drill or exercise. Like you'll just see things where there's all sorts of creative ideas happening, and it doesn't mean those ideas are bad in certain contexts. It just means that like in certain contexts they probably are more helpful than others. And so guys are just ping-ponging all around, program hopping, chasing something, and it's like you're never going to get results. Like whatever program you commit to, you're not guaranteed to get results, but you're guaranteed not to get results if you're hopping around program to program and not actually giving any one thing a chance. So just being very careful about all the information overload we're getting, and just being tempted and drawn to like try new things every single day. So I don't know, I think there's a fine balance. You don't want to just go put full blinders on it and like never explore other ideas, but you also need to know what time of the year to do that, have an intentionality behind doing it, and not just chase every, new or crazy thing you see online.
Right. I definitely agree. I've done that a lot throughout my career. See a video of somebody throwing 100 and watch it 50 times. And like, what does he do differently than me? And not even considering, some of the things you've already mentioned. Like, you got to ask yourself, is this right for me? Right. Where I think a lot of people don't ask that. They think it's right for him. It works for him. It'll work for me too. We've named dozens of examples at this point about, things that can get people into trouble. And the DeGrom thing for me, trying to just drift like crazy, was never going to work.
Another point on the fads too is in so many of the scenarios where there's been like some fad, it's been, in most cases, it's been like pushed on a player, like with some college coach or some pro coach or wherever, and we end up working with them, but they tell us the story of what happened. In most cases, it's fad comes out, like some successful big leaguer, now everyone's chasing this fad, coach sees the fad, good intentions, and they make all their players do it. Or at least they make like this player do it. In most cases, not every single case, the players reiterate like it never felt good. It never actually felt comfortable, but I didn't feel comfortable saying anything to my coach. Like, oh, they taught me a sweeper. It like I could tell it was like I could tell I was cheating to create the sweep, but they were like telling me that was a good job. Like 20 inches, that was better than the 12-inch one where you stayed in your arm slot. And so they look back and they're like, well, if I had just like told my coach that this didn't feel comfortable, maybe this is something we tried, but then like backed off of because of that. But in a lot of cases, they don't actually speak up. And so, I mean, some of this can actually be put on the athletes. You need to speak up. If something is really going to help you, like pretty quickly, like, it clicks in most cases right away. Like within a week, if you're going to pick up like a new pitch grip, like it clicks pretty quickly. It's not like the first 11 weeks of trying to learn to pronate a changeup go terrible. It feels awful. And then week 12, suddenly it feels amazing. Like in most cases, if something's going to work, it feels pretty good right away. It feels more efficient. You feel more on time. Like, oh my God, like that ball just came out so effortless. Like, what did I do there?
Yeah.
So I think some of the onus is on the coaches, and then some of it's on the athletes. Like, you got to speak up if something doesn't feel comfortable, and hopefully your coach respects you enough to back off that fad or that change. Okay, we tried it, no big deal. We're just going to back off it. We tried shortening arm action. The velo was down. The metrics weren't where we need to be. You told me it felt bad. Command went down. Okay, we're going to back off that, not just like push it through.
I think anytime you try something new, if you try it for a week or two and you don't have a handful of reps where you kind of were like, that felt nice, or that was close, or I felt something different there, then yeah, I mean, you probably need to go try something else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I personally, one of the big unlocks for me was like changing my thoughts around back leg tension, which you guys have mentioned. You guys have done a video on that before. And I pretty much the second or third time I tried a specific set position, it was like I had one throw where it was like, oh, that felt easy. And it was just as hard as my last rep that felt, very, very stressed.
Yep.
Tried to throw as hard as I could. And dang, I was in a better position that time. So like, even though like maybe my next 50 reps weren't as good as that one, I knew that I was onto something. And if you don't have that moment in your first week or two, probably need to try something else.
Same thing with a new pitch grip. If you're trying to learn a kick change and like, okay, maybe like I only throw 2 out of 20 that are any good, but those 2 just like turbo drop. Okay, there's something here. Like, I've proven to myself that I can do that. This might be worth pursuing. And now you can work on being more consistent with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I think we have a couple more. I think we have 3 more. But for me, one issue is trying to work on everything at the same time, like for the entire year. So not like periodizing the year. So just thinking that we can work on velocity all year, or work on like velocity and command and work on everything all year, and not actually like break up the year into phases. So one way this can play out is, guys say my main goal is velocity. And so like they just think they can go the entire offseason working on pull downs and working on mound velocity stuff. And then like 2 weeks before the season, they're like, oh crap, like season's about to start. And then like they think they can just throw a couple command bullpens or a couple live ABs into the mix and they're going to be ready for the season. Whereas like we know as coaches now, like having been through it, like you can't be too greedy with some of the velocity stuff. Like it still needs to fit into the overall like scheme of the off season. Like you cannot compromise on the fact that you need to be throwing live inter squads, like highly specific stuff in that 4 to 6 to arguably 8 weeks before the season if you want to actually be prepared for game 1. You can't just go full velocity and then expect it to just magically be there once the season starts. Okay, so we know we need a phase for command or like live work with hitters in there under game stress. Okay, we know we need an on-ramping phase. We can't just jump right into this stuff. Like, we know we need some phase where we can build strength for most guys, some sort of power phase in their training in the weight room. How does that correspond? Okay, maybe there's a 6-week phase. Maybe there's a 12-week phase somewhere in the middle of the offseason where we can work on velo. But looking at it from that perspective of like, what's the end goal and how do I build back from there? And where does the velo stuff fit into that plan? As opposed to just like, oh, I'm just going to do velo stuff and cross my fingers and like hope when the season starts. I can just pitch and execute, and my off speed's there, my pitch shapes are there. So what do you guys think about that? About like how you can like organize and plan out the entire like the phases of the throwing for the off season?
Basically, I mean, you just have to make sure that you're hitting all of those areas. I know I've made the mistakes in the past. We've had a short conversation about it. where I was a pretty hard thrower, probably through most of my career sat 94, 95, would run it up to 97, 98. So in my mind, velocity wasn't what I needed. I needed, my slider was bad one year. So I remember spending an entire offseason just ripping sliders, trying different grips, spiking it, unspiking it, trying to get sweep, trying to get gyro, like whatever. And what I really needed through that was to just throw that slider harder. So a velo phase in that regard for me would have been good, even though I was already a pretty hard thrower. But to your point, how to lay everything out throughout the off season is just making sure you're hitting everything, like getting the on-ramp, and then trying to make sure you're getting plenty of time before the season to put everything together. When you're doing your velo phase, there's going to be days where you're throwing into a net, where you're doing pull downs and there is no target, nothing. Like you can just focus on what your body's doing, and that's it. It takes away a lot of things that your mind is worried about there. Even just throwing to a catcher, you have to kind of get it in this area. So there's something that you're focused on out there, whereas throwing into the net, everything is, very just focused on what is my body doing. Sometimes I don't even look at the target. I just really focus on what I'm feeling, and taking those feelings and then, getting the focus a little more narrow and having those velo phases where you're also trying to throw a hard strike. I think not a lot of people do that, where they're like, I'm either trying to hit my spot or I'm trying to throw hard, when in a game you need both. You have to have both. So if you're not blending those together as the offseason goes along and getting more specific as you get closer to the season, I mean, you're probably going to be a worse pitcher in some regard. In one area, you're going to lose command, you're going to lose feel for a breaking ball. Something's going to be gone. So maybe you get 1 mile an hour or 2 miles an hour on your velo, but is that really more valuable than becoming an overall better pitcher? Not at all.
Yeah, I think people look at the command versus velocity. They have like a false dichotomy between command and velocity. They think that you only have one or you can only have the other. And really, what we know, what everyone knows, obviously, is the best pitchers in the world have both, or at least if their command is only average, they have like some absurd, Josh Hader level stuff where it's just like this completely outlier pitch. So if you don't have that complete outlier pitch and you're just throwing 100 and like, or you're throwing like submarine like 92, like if you don't have that, you need some blend of good or above average or elite command and stuff. You need command and stuff in some proportion. And so the question isn't, you get like angry people online that like someone did a pull down in December, like whatever, angry comment about like back in my day we worked on command. No, the point is like there's a lot of different paths to get there. Like you can focus more at different points of the offseason on the velocity side of the equation and then the command side later on, and then okay, that's how we get to improve velocity, improve command. Or this guy has really good velocity already, we can spend most of his offseason working on command or pitch shapes or the rest of his arsenal because his velocity is already there. Okay, this guy already has elite command. We can spend most of his offseason working more on the velocity side, knowing that that's probably going to be there with only maybe a 4-week command phase, live ABs, things like that. So the point isn't velocity training is always bad because it always negatively affects command, or command training always negatively affects velocity. It's like there's a lot of different paths to get there, but we need both. And so don't just look at like one pitch or one pull down and like immediately judge what that guy's doing, because you have no idea what the big picture is and what his plan is and what his starting point is and how he's going to incorporate both of those aspects. As long as both of those aspects are incorporated and you have a plan to work on both, I think that's the important piece.
It's also funny too, like you move better on the mound, you tend to throw a little bit harder and you tend to throw more strikes by getting in better positions. So it's like kind of like two-edged sword. Like if you move better, you're probably going to do a little bit better of both, but people somehow can't really comprehend that you can kill two birds with one stone there.
I think people look at velocity stuff and they think it's only like just like pounding Red Bull and like trying to rotate harder.
Yeah.
Like that, maybe that type of not moving faster initially, maybe that helps command, but like, okay, maybe there's certain guys where they just start head yanking, pulling way off and like 120% effort. Yeah. Okay, at that point, maybe that isn't negatively affecting that guy's command, but that type of stuff is like 5% of what should actually go into velocity work. Most of velocity work is like teaching guys how to actually move more efficiently, how to load better, how to keep their posture more stacked, how to stay closed longer, how to get the arm on time, how to feel a pull and unwinding from the arm action. Like it's actually just getting them to understand and move more efficiently so that they have higher velocity at lower perceived effort, but they're more efficient. So they're producing that velocity more efficiently. It's not just like how fast can I move, how hard can I rip a pull down, and how much caffeine can I like drink to artificially raise these numbers. There's definitely like a piece of that. There's a piece of some guys need to learn how to just like have higher output, like they're already moving in and out of fairly good positions, but they just need the actual like, you just need to move faster. You need more motor unit activation. Like you just need higher output. Okay, those guys are definitely going to benefit from feeling a little more adrenaline in their training, maybe a little bit of caffeine, maybe a little bit of like, from the mental side, getting them into that aggressive mindset, and just like, hey, have you ever actually tried throwing hard? All you do is just like cruise at 90%. Have you ever tried throwing hard? Those guys benefit from that. But I think some people think that that's all velocity training is, when that's actually a very small sliver of it.
Well, you look at the whole premise of plyo testing, like you're putting a body in a constraint to figure out a task to throw the ball harder on a radar gun. So it's like your body's going to naturally want to figure it out in an athletic fashion. So it's like that right there is a velo phase, but it's also mechanical work. And if you probably do both, you're probably going to hit both ends of the spectrum. So it's like it's just remembering like you can do multiple things to work on both at the exact same time.
I think for me, as I've learned to throw harder and my velo floor has come up, it's all because of throwing more efficiently. But it has made my timing like way more consistent. So that makes command easier. And if you go about it that way, I think, when things are timed up right, the ball's pretty much going to go where you want, assuming your direction is correct. And doing that over and over and over again and just throwing as hard as you can, timing it up perfectly every time, that is going to lead to a very consistent release point. Everything is going to go right where you want it almost every time.
Yeah.
And for me, that's velo and command together right there.
Yeah.
Better timing, the ball goes where you want, and it goes really hard to that spot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I had the same experience when I figured out how to actually like keep my pelvis closed and actually ride direction towards the target. Like the laser pointer cue for me was also like I was trying to use my hip as like this was my like sight.
Yeah.
Like now suddenly I had direction in terms of like the direction that I was throwing versus just like lift, open. Okay, now I have to coordinate a ton of different things going on at once. To me, it felt like, okay, you're on like a merry-go-round and you have to pick like the perfect time to release the ball. Like, oh crap, the ball's over there.
I always say it's like you're trying to throw a rock at a mailbox from a moving car.
Yes, that's what it feels like when you don't have direction.
Exactly.
You're just
How
like,
can you command that?
There's no direction. You're just purely rotational. You're on the merry-go-round. You're like, you better pick the exact right time to release the ball.
Right.
But if you have the actual linear move, now how easy is it to throw a strike if you're on a car moving towards the target and you just have to release the ball
Exactly.
at the right time? It's very easy. It's like bowling. If you can get your direction and then like release the ball, like you can bowl the ball where you want. And if I told you had to bowl like this, you have no shot.
Yeah, your misses are going to be a lot bigger for
Right.
sure.
So there's definitely those areas where the velocity, the efficiency, the command, they all overlap in a very like perfect way. And then there's also types of command training, types of velocity training that can at times interfere with each other. And so you kind of need to just know how to navigate those waters.
Definitely agree.
Okay, you wrote down mass equals gas. So talk about that kind of misconception or
Well, I did this. So right now I probably weigh 210, 215 pounds, somewhere in there. I've been as heavy as
you're 6'7",
6'6".
6'6".
I've been as heavy as 260, maybe 255, somewhere in there. And, for me, it was just a very misguided attempt at like some of these guys that are throwing really hard in the big leagues are just massive. And I just need to get that big. And I was doing it in the weight room. I was lifting and eating a lot of protein and everything, but I was also just like getting as many calories as possible. This is the slowest I ever threw in my entire life. I was probably 90 to 92. I would have a random day where I could run it up to 95, 96, but my floor was way down. I felt awful, was just slow. So understanding that mass doesn't equal gas, lean mass equals gas.
lean mass equals potential gas.
Potential gas, yeah. But like, I didn't understand at the time that fat mass is only going to slow me down, and fat doesn't produce any power. It literally is just weight dragging you down. And while having some mass to move around can be a good thing, that mass needs to be able to produce some sort of power.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was throwing slow at the time. I was pitching terribly. And if you go look at my numbers and look at the worst year I've ever had, that's the year that I was 250, 260 pounds. And for me, that was something that I see a lot of guys do now, just thinking like get big and like not really worried about the body comp. And I'm very, very quick nowadays to say, hey, like do it the right way.
Yeah.
And to be clear, like what you're saying isn't that gaining muscle mass can't be beneficial. You're saying that dirty bulking or raising your body fat levels over a certain threshold will just slow you down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like be as big as possible, but make it as lean as possible as well.
Yeah. And I would add making sure that you have the mobility to actually, feel like you're able to transfer energy effectively. Like if you get to the point where like, benching 225 pounds, your arm is still able to like work like a whip, and now benching 275 or 315, you feel like you can't even like get your arm back into retraction or into layback because you have too much tissue there. Well, it doesn't mean that like benching is necessarily bad, but you might have to double down on some of the mobility work and the tissue work to actually allow your arm to not be fighting like these fascial and soft tissue restrictions that can very much accumulate from the weight room in certain guys. And I know you have firsthand experience with this.
Yeah. I mean, I was always under the understanding of, I'm 6 foot. The average weight in the big leaguer, I think, is like 210 or 220 or whatever. So it's like, all right, like I need to put on whatever weight possible to be able to get there. I wasn't really able to put on bad weight, so it was always good weight. But for me, it always seemed like the bigger I got, the slower I threw, and it was less. For me, it was no range of motion, no explosiveness, and it was just straight try to create force going down the mound. And force equals mass times acceleration. I already move fast, so I have more mass. I'm going to produce more force. And it's like, yeah, like to a certain degree, yeah, but that really didn't work. And it's like actually learning, like, okay, like my body moves faster, more optimal at like a specific, weight. For me, I was like 205. So like every time I got there, that's when I threw my hardest. When I got to 215, 220, I was throwing really slow. And obviously, freshman year when you're 180 pounds, it's like you got to put on that weight right there. Like that's the situation for me. It's like if you're 180 pounds going to college, like, yeah, you probably do need to put on weight, and like mass is going to help you out there. But at the same time, like what's the difference between 205 and 220? Like it could be very detrimental.
Yeah, I think the point is to do it in the right way and make sure that you're gaining lean mass primarily. It doesn't mean you won't gain some fat and you can't do like fat loss phases, but you're primarily focused on lean mass. It's not just about the weight. So weight is just a proxy for like strength, power gain, muscle gain. But like really when people say like, oh, I want to gain weight, what they're actually talking about is like, I want to gain strength, I want to gain power, and I want to gain muscle mass. And so just gaining like 30 pounds for the sake of gaining 30 pounds, but 27 pounds of that is fat. Like I played in college with this one guy. He was like 85, 88 and 6'7" something. He was like a tall guy. He was already like 220, but he was like not a good body comp. And he thought he'd need to throw harder. So he went and he basically just started eating candy and like Chick-fil-A. I mean, it was the worst quality diet you could possibly have come up with, but he put on 30 pounds that off season and he still threw 86, 88, 85, 88. And so like for me, that was a big eye opener at the time because I had put my sights on like, okay, I'm 6'3". At that point I was 185. I'd gotten up to 205. And my goal was like, I want to weigh 235 and just be like a tank. And that really like opened my eyes of like, it's not necessarily about, first off, I realized that like to get to that weight, I would have to be like a lot higher body fat percentage. Like it's actually not feasible to look like a roided up body. Like it's just like not, it wasn't an attainable goal naturally to be 235 and like lean. And so I was kind of naive in that sense, but then I also see these examples of guys gaining 30 plus pounds and it not helping at all for velocity. Okay, what's going on there? Okay, it's actually much more about muscle mass. It's more about strength. It's more about power output. And that's why you see pitchers at the highest level throwing hard at 195 and then also guys that throw hard at, 240. And so what I tell guys now is like, we have certain kind of like strength metrics that we want to see where if you can hit those metrics, you're probably already within like a general body weight range. Like if you can squat mid 300s, full depth for reps, if you can deadlift mid 400s, if you can bench and row 100-pound dumbbells for reps, like, okay, you're probably already over like 190 pounds. It's very hard. It'd be very hard to get to some of these numbers and not be. But that's the primary thing. It's not hyper obsessing about the weight per se. What would you say, Craig? I'm curious about like CC Sabathia, because he's a guy that when he was bigger, he tended to throw harder, and then he tried to lose weight, he lost the weight, and then he threw slower. What do you think happened there?
I think with CC there was a lot of stuff around people trying to get him to be someone he wasn't. I think I watched the documentary on him, and he talked about it a little bit about how there was some stuff going on in his personal life as well that may have caused him to lose weight. But I think that's kind of an outlier example. I think for the most part, guys, if they lean up and improve their body comp and get bigger and stronger, like things are going to go well for them. I think a guy like CC, I wouldn't like to use him as an example as a dude like this guy was really big and threw really hard, so we should go for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be outliers first off. So he might just be an outlier where he performs better at a higher body weight. But my not knowing anything additional about the situation, you can obviously have guys that bulk too fast and all they're doing is putting on body fat or excessively putting on body fat faster than they're putting on lean mass, such that it slows them down, such that they throw slower on the mound. But you can also have the reverse where we have a certain percentage of guys that we work with, they need to lose body fat. So it's not just like guys getting bigger. If you try to crash diet and you try to lose body fat excessively fast, in a lot of cases you actually sacrifice some muscle mass. So you sacrifice lean tissue. If you try to go and lose 3 pounds a week for the next 8 weeks, okay, you might be able to do it. You might lose 24 pounds, but half of that might be muscle mass. 8 pounds of that a third of that might be muscle mass. Okay, maybe CC lost 40 pounds, but maybe 15 pounds of that was lean mass. So there's pros and cons. Okay, he's a little bit leaner, he's lighter for sure, but proportionally, is his relative strength actually any better? Because potentially what could have happened is he actually lost a substantial amount of muscle mass during that crash dieting process. If you're trying to lose 40 pounds in a 3-month period or off season, it's possible to do it and maintain your muscle mass, but it's also very, very possible to do it. Your strength numbers might be down 10, 20, 30%. Okay, my body fat's also down, but the net sum of that equals I'm throwing 87 instead of 95.
Yeah.
Well, you look like the opposite of CC, like a Bartolo, like when he first came up.
Yeah.
A little bit leaner, throwing the crap out of the ball. As he gets older, it gets a little bit bigger. Velo keeps going down, so it's like everyone's going to be a different situation where, CC tries to lose weight and he throws slower. Yeah. Where it's like,
and not a lot of people think of Bartolo as a hard thrower.
Yeah, you just throw really hard.
Yeah, he used to throw gas.
The other piece to realize is for the guys that get really strong, you were squatting 600 pounds, benching 300 plus pounds. There are certain adaptations that start to present themselves more and more once those loads get higher. Specifically, putting that much load through your spine can absolutely, your biggest issue is actually spinal mobility. Yeah. When you're putting this compressive and axial loading through your spine, the vertebrae actually densify. You actually are on some level reducing your mobility, and powerlifters are a great example of this. They have these very dense vertebrae to be able to sustain 600 plus 700, 800, 1,000 pounds on their spine, but they can't rotate. But that's actually a beneficial adaptation for their sport. They don't want to be able to rotate. You want to have a very rigid column to support as much axial load as possible. And so okay, maybe squatting 200, 300, 400 pounds a couple times a week or once a week doesn't present itself that way, but you get to a certain threshold, you were absolutely probably having that adaptation was starting to show through and negatively affect your ability to actually rotate, extend your spine on the mound.
Yeah, it was what did squatting 600 compared to 400 pounds really do for me? Not really much.
Once you're squatting 400 pounds, let's now produce that force as fast as possible. Let's go jump 40 inches instead of trying to figure out how to get our max strength higher. Are the 100-mile-an-hour throwers in the big leagues squatting 600 pounds? If that was beneficial, they probably would be. Or you'd see more of that. Maybe Spencer Strider could, even then, probably not. Maybe he'd have to train specifically for that.
Evaldi, I think, is known for being a really heavy squatter, but
big time.
Yeah, I don't think power production and the emphasis on power during lifting cycles was really a thing until a couple of years ago. So I think a lot of people missed the boat on that, especially me. I didn't know that was even a key important part. So trying to make sure you hit on every different type of training is probably going to be really important. Also knowing what one is needed for you.
Yeah, it can be it can be difficult for some athletes to see, and what we're talking about really is the strength velocity kind of continuum, like, max effort, 1 rep max squat, all the way to like, throwing a baseball is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Like we're trying to accelerate a 5-ounce baseball, or even further. I mean, you could talk about 4-ounce, 3-ounce, like underload type stuff, or like for sprinting, that can be, you can do like sled pushes, sled drags, all the way to like accelerated sprinting, like downhill sprinting, or something where it's accelerated. But the point being, like, guys will, maybe they go from 75 to 85 by getting stronger. And they're like, oh man, this is amazing. If I just get even stronger, I'll throw 90. And if I get even stronger, I'll throw 95. And then eventually you get stuck, because what gets you to 85 or 90, or again, for certain guys, just getting strong will get them to 95. But that's not what's necessarily going to get you from 92 to 96, or from 93 to 97. Like, it starts to be these much more, fine details that are the difference makers at that point, because you've tapped out most of the capacity that you're going to get from the force side of the equation at a certain point. And that point is roughly where you see big league pitchers at from a strength standpoint. They're strong, they're athletic, they're reasonably lean in a lot of cases, but they're not power lifters. They're not benching 400 pounds, they're not squatting 600 pounds, they're not power lifters. And so just we've coached dozens of 100-mile-an-hour guys, and like, they're athletic, strong dudes, but that's not why they throw 100. That's like one checkbox to check. They also move great. The mobility is acceptable to very good in some cases, but mostly they move very efficiently on the mound. And so just realizing, like, once you've checked that box, the gears can absolutely shift to more speed, more power type stuff, like applying that force as quickly as possible, and not just getting stuck like trying to chase becoming a power lifter, because at the end of the day, like, I wish it was that simple, but unfortunately it's not that simple.
Yeah.
Yep.
If that was the
Me
case,
too.
if you walked in here and looked at every guy in here that's really jacked, they'd be the hardest throwers, and it's not always.
In a lot of
the
cases
case.
they're not. Like, in college, I mean, I can think of like the 3 or 4 like guys, like strongest guys I ever played with in college, stronger than any of the 100-mile-an-hour guys that we've coached. Like, absolute, like, behemoths, tanks, like Tim Tebow type, right? Like, a lot of times, in most cases, they were the worst throwers on the team.
Absolutely.
They had like too much mass in their upper half. They could, when one guy was benching 365 as a freshman in college, I'm like, what's going on? But he couldn't throw. Like, he literally, like, he couldn't get his arm back. Again, not to say that he couldn't have figured that out. He wasn't doing any tissue work, any mobility work. Like, he absolutely could have overcome it. Tim Tebow could have overcome the tight pecs and figure out how to actually get his arm up and actually move like a more efficient arm action. But in a lot of cases, like, the biggest, strongest guys are actually, the skill side of the equation is the lowest.
Right.
The movement efficiency side of the equation is the lowest. So it's just knowing how it fits into the overall equation, and not losing sight of the bigger picture.
I mean, you've said it a million times. Everything is important, but I think everybody should find their lowest hanging fruit. Some, like you said, some guys are going to go from 75 to 85 just by getting stronger. That doesn't mean everything else goes out the window. And all of a sudden, you're going to be, all you got to do is increase all your lifting numbers, and like you're going to reach all your goals. Find your lowest hanging fruit, attack it first, and then everything else kind of fits into the puzzle from there.
This exact thing came up when I interviewed Ben Joyce about a year ago, and he literally said, like, when he was 240 and just like the strongest he'd ever been, that was when he was like throwing 98, 99, like he actually threw harder and got up to 105 after he dropped the weight down a little bit, started doubling down on mobility. Obviously he wasn't just like weak all of a sudden. He was probably still 90+% of his max ever strength. He was still way above the thresholds that you need to be, but just changing the focus. What got him to 100 in his case wasn't what was going to get him to 103, 104, 105. So like the exact same thing we're talking about from one of the hardest throwers of all time.
I think a big misconception too is like once you stop lifting heavy, you lose it immediately. It's like once you build like that strength floor, like it's really tough to lose. So like if you don't have to do all that strength work all the time, like in Joyce's example, like he had that strength floor, he's basically gonna have that forever, but increasing like range of motion, like strength through range of motion, like stuff like that, like no wonder he ended up throwing harder from it.
Marsili, I think you had one more mistake that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like understanding, being in velocity phase and expecting my velocity to go up immediately. I kind of thought they just kind of went hand in hand. Like, I do, pull downs, I do power testing, like my velocity is going to go up immediately from that. So, I mean, hitting 2 a couple of velocity sessions like in college. It was like go through like 6 to 8 week like pull down thing, like feel really good. Like my pull down numbers go up, like go on the mound the next week, and it's like the exact same number it was when I started. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Like just did all this work, everything else went up. And it's like for me, it took a while to understand that, you know, by all the different stimuluses that you've been using on your body, it takes a while for your body to actually adapt and recover from that. So for me, it was just kind of funny. Like every 6 weeks is after I finished the velo phase is when I actually noticed, you know, a velo bump. It was twice in college and once after I was done with that. And it was like, okay, so it took my body 6 weeks to kind of recover from the stimulus that I kind of put the body through. And then, you know, after that, my body was throwing harder. But just by doing velocity work, just by doing, you know, overload, underload, pull downs, just by doing like plyo testing, like your velo is not going up like immediately. There has to be like a, you know, recovery and adaptation phase for your body to actually make those changes.
And with that too, like some people, it's usually like the younger kids who it's the first time they've ever specifically tried to improve velocity. So they go, most cases, the first time they try is they don't even like go on a real program. They just go buy some weighted balls and like rip them randomly and until their arm hurts, and then say weighted balls are dangerous. But you start to, it's relatively easy to improve like a pull down number if you've never done pull downs. It's a novel stimulus. Like the first time you do it, you're going to be tripping all over yourself, not really synced up. It's going to be whatever, let's say 87, and then a month later it's 95 because you've gotten better at coordinating the run up, on timing up the block, timing up the arm action.
Yep.
And any velocity gains you make in like these, you know, decontextualized drills or pull downs or whatever, it's not a one-to-one transfer to the mound. And that's like a given to anyone who's been around the game, but like to any younger kids like or parents watching this, like gaining 10 miles an hour on a pull down does not mean that you should gain 10 miles an hour on the mound.
Yeah.
You might not even gain 2 miles an hour on the mound. But the point is that we're hoping that some of that output can transfer. So we're hoping the answer is greater than 0 miles an hour can transfer. With pull down specifically, like again, sometimes the full distance running pull downs like transfer great, and guys can sync that up and still block and like not just like fall through their block and fall on their face. But in a lot of cases, if we see the transfer is not there and a guy is doing like the pull down type stuff, like condensing that to more of like a 1 or 2 step shuffle where it's like literally just like a couple steps and throw, or like a leg lift curl hop where it's a lot more similar to their delivery.
Yeah.
It's something to give an overspeed stimulus, but where their body can actually figure out how to coordinate that back into their what matters, which is their delivery. And so if running 50 feet is too much, you can't coordinate that, you can absolutely find a way to shorten the distance. And maybe it's only 3 miles an hour above what your mound velo is, but it still represents some degree of overload stimulus, overspeed stimulus to your arm. And the point is transfer.
Well, if you throw a pull down 10 miles an hour harder than you throw off the mound, what are you really accomplishing? Like, you can throw the ball hard while you run. Like, that's not really, again, translating to, like, on the mound, like, close representation. Like, maybe, like, instead of doing, like, a full run-up, like, pull down, like, why don't we do, like, a mound shuffle? Or something where you're simulating something close to the actual pitching delivery. Something that's closer and probably has more, you know, a better chance of helping you, you know, correlate to the mound and actually, like, shorten that gap a little bit.
Right. You can increase your pull down by, 10 miles an hour by just running further and further into it each week and getting this artificial momentum.
Yeah.
But maybe 2 of that transfers, or 1 of that transfers, or none of it transfers. Or you can take your, a mound shuffle or a leg lift crow hop or a 2-step shuffle, up 3 miles an hour, but 2 of that 3 miles an hour transfers, or all of that transfers. So again, not everyone needs to do pull downs or shuffles or any of that, but the point is like an increase in some sort of throwing or training metric is not going to necessarily be a 1-to-1 correlation to the mound. That's okay. That's actually normal. But the goal is that we maximize the amount of transfer we can get.
Progress also takes time too. It's not just going to happen immediately once you finish either.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hopefully people got something out of that. We could talk all day. We'll probably do this again. If people enjoyed like listening to this, we'd come up with 100 more of these. So happily do this again if people like this format. But thanks a lot, guys.